UN Millennium Goals to stop the carnage. In the United States, almost 1,000 people die while doing childbirth each year, and another 65,000 nearly die. This situation is social, not simply natural. Things are like this for political and economic reasons. We made them this way. Pregnancy undoubtedly has its pleasures. Natality is unique, and that is why, even as others suffer deeply from their coerced participation in pregnancy, many people excluded from the experience for whatever reason, be they cis, trans, or non-binary, feel deeply bereft. But even so, and even in full recognition of the sense of the sublime that people experience in gestating, it is remarkable that there isn't more consistent support for research into alleviating the problem of pregnancy. The everyday miracle that transpires in pregnancy, the production of that number more than one and less than two, receives more idealizing lip service than it does respect. Certainly, the creation of new proto-personhood in the uterus is a marvel that artists have engaged for millennia and psychoanalytic philosophers for almost a century. None of us should need reminding. That's a bit that I have to rewrite because I keep making this claim that most of us don't need reminding. I don't know why I thought that. That we are each of us the blinking, thinking, pulsating products of gestational work and its equally laborious aftermaths. That's true. That's what we are. Yet in 2017, a reader and thinker as compendious as Maggie Nelson can still state, semi-incredulously but with a strong case behind her, that philosophical writing about actually doing gestating constitutes an absence in culture. What particularly fascinates me about the subject is pregnancy's morbidity, the little discussed ways that, biophysically speaking, gestating is an unconscionably destructive business. The basic mechanics, according to evolutionary biologist Suzanne Sajidin, have evolved in our species in a manner that can only be described as a ghastly fluke. Scientists have discovered, by experimentally putting placental cells in a mouse carcass, that the active cells of pregnancy rampage unless aggressively contained through every tissue they touch. Capiaco was not citing these studies when she remarked that having cancer is like having a baby, but she was unconsciously channeling their findings. The same goes for Elena Ferrante's protagonist in The Days of Abandonment, who reports, "I was like a lump of food that my children chewed without stopping, a cud made of a living material that continually amalgamated and softened its living substance to allow two greedy bloodsuckers to nourish themselves." The genes that are active in embryonic development are also implicated in cancer, and that is not the only reason why pregnancy among Homo sapiens, in Sajidin's account, perpetrates a kind of biological bloodbath. Bloodbath is kind of cool because etymologically amnion actually means bowl in which the blood of slaughtered lambs is caught. So like a literal bloodbath. It is the specific, functionally rare type of placenta we have to work with, the hemocorial placenta, which determines that this entity that Chikako Takashita calls the mother fetus tears itself apart inside. Rather than simply interfacing with the gestator's biology through a limited filter or contenting itself with freely proffered secretions, this placenta digests its way into its host's arteries, securing full access to most tissues. So mammals whose placentas don't breach the walls of the womb in this way can simply abort or reabsorb unwanted fetuses at any stage of a pregnancy. For them, life goes on almost as normal during a pregnancy. Conversely, a human cannot rip away a placenta in the event of a change of heart, or say a sudden drought, or an outbreak of war, without risk of lethal hemorrhage. Our embryo hugely enlarges and paralyzes the wider arterial system supplying it, while at the same time elevating hormonally the blood pressure and sugar supply. And I haven't even yet touched on postnatal PTSD. No wonder philosophers have asked whether gestators are persons. It seems impossible that a society would let such grisly things happen on a regular basis to entities endowed with legal standing. Given the biology of hemachorial placentation, the fact that so many of us endowed with viable wombs are walking around in a state of physical implantability, no pill, no IUD, ought by rights to be regarded as the most remarkable thing. To be sure, it has been relatively straightforward in many parts of the world to stop gestating, at least at the very beginning of the process, simply because a perhaps even unnoticed miscarriage occurred, or because the gestator has had access through a knowledgeable friend to abortive affiance. In 2008, an artist, Eliza Schwartz, self-inseminated with fresh sperm and then self-aborted over and over again, every month, for 9 months, by swallowing pills. It was a kind of art project. I'm curious what that perverse stop-start labor experiment was like. Schwartz's true, non-defensive thoughts on the matter are unfortunately obliterated by a wall of right-wing bellowing. Unsurprisingly, given that one would expect to feel good upon being extricated from a non-stop job one isn't willing to do, in general, the experience of termination generates feelings of relief and cared-forness. As Erica Miller evidences in Happy Abortions, sustained negative emotions are extremely rare in connection with having an abortion. I probably shouldn't be ad-libbing like this, but tomorrow I have to go to New York and there's a Focus on the Family demonstration where they're going to beam a 4-dimensional fetal ultrasound in Times Square, and all the, you probably know this, the abortion rights organizations are all going to come out and tell them to fuck off. It really scares me. Gestational fix. Pregnancy has long been substantially techno-fixed already when it comes to those whose lives really matter. Under capitalism and imperialism, safer or at least medically supported gestation has typically been the privilege of the upper classes, and the high-end care historically afforded to the rich when they gestate their own young has lately been supplemented by a technology that absorbs 100% of the damage from the consumer's point of view. The human labor of a gestational surrogate. Surrogacy, in that sense, as news media still report, began booming globally in 2011. Around 2016, the industry began suffering a series of setbacks. Thailand and Nepal banned it altogether for the foreseeable future, and other major hubs, India, Cambodia, Mexico, legislated against all but altruistic, heterosexual surrogacy arrangements. Nevertheless, there are still privately registered, profit-making infertility clinics on every continent, listing surrogates for hire who will remain, so they say, genetically entirely unrelated to the babies that consumers carry away at the end of the process. For just as the Kanye commentators predicted, surrogacy bans do not halt, but actually fuel the baby trade, rendering gestational workers far more vulnerable than before. Surrogacy bans uproot, isolate, and criminalize gestational workers, driving them underground and often into foreign lands, where they risk prosecution alongside their bosses and brokers, far away from their support networks. In July 2018, 33 pregnant Cambodians were detained and charged in Phnom Penh, together with their Chinese boss, for human trafficking offences. Separately, one Mumbai-based infertility specialist began recruiting surrogate workers in Kenya immediately after India's Supreme Court decision against commercial and homosexual surrogacy. Through IVF, he implants the Kenyans with embryos belonging to his gay clients. Pregnant, those contractors are flown back to Nairobi after 24 weeks monitoring in India. The babies are birthed in designated hospitals in Nairobi where clients can pick them up, and the doctor maintains that he's not broken Indian law because he's not interacted with gay clients within that territory. All he has provided technically is IVF for Kenyan healthcare seekers, the workers. In other words, clinicians simply jump through legal loopholes by moving surrogate mothers across borders, exposing surrogate mothers to greater risks, while expanding and diversifying their business partnerships worldwide. The trend towards commercial surrogacy does not constitute then a qualitative transformation in the mode of biological reproduction that currently destroys, as those aforementioned mortality statistics suggest, so many adults' lives. I do focus on the adults in my book. In fact, capitalist biotech does nothing at all to solve the problem of pregnancy per se, because that is not the problem it is addressing. It is responding exclusively to demand for genetic parenthood, to which it applies the logic of outsourcing. While the development remains uneven and tentative, it is clear that what capitalism is proposing by alienating and globalizing gestational surrogacy in this way is, as usual, an option involving moving the problem around. Pregnancy work is not so much disappearing or getting easier as crashing through various regulatory barriers onto an open market. Let the poor do the dirty work wherever they are cheapest or most convenient to enroll. And no wonder, given that the ground for such a development was already being laid as early as the late 19th century, when large swathes of the colonial upper class, frequently women-led eugenics movement in Europe and North America, argued that the best way to realize pregnancy's promise, namely a thriving future race achieved through sexual virtue and white supremacist hygiene, was for the state to economically discipline all sexual activity unconducive to that horizon. As good social democrats, these feminist progressives wanted a nation state that was duty-bound to feed, shelter, clothe, educate, and train the gestational labourers present within its territory, and especially the products of that gestational labour. Since this was then and remains now a costly-sounding proposition, a set of enduring ideas and policies were propagated around the turn of the century, according to which, as far as metropolitan proletarians are concerned, having babies spells financial irresponsibility and surefire ruin in and of itself, especially out of wedlock. The same discouragement applied, more or less, to non-white, Italian, Irish, Arab at the time, immigrants on the Eastern American seaboard. And lumpen proletarian populations in the colonies, notably India, face more hands-on methods, including, famously, sterilization. Meanwhile, curiously for families of the capitalist class, having babies represents a virtuous and a vital investment, guaranteeing their and the very economy's good fortunes. It's been but a series of logical steps from that hegemonic notion of reproductive meritocracy to the beginnings of the pregnancy gig economy that we can glimpse to get today. In unprecedentedly literal ways, people make babies for others in exchange for the money required to underwrite, morally as well as materially, their own otherwise barely justifiable baby having. It's not quite accurate, though, to say that the basic ideas of early eugenicist reproductive policy have resurfaced in late capitalism, or even to say they've survived. Rather, as W.B. Du Bois lays out in Black Reconstruction, or Dorothy Roberts in Killing the Black Body, these interlocking logics of property and subhumanity, privatization and punishment form the template that organized capitalism in the first place and sustains it as a system. Dominant liberal democratic discourses that hype a world of post-racial values and bootstrap universality only serve to render dispossessed populations the more responsible for their trespass of being alive and having kids while black. Stratification is self-reproducing and not designed to be resolved. It's perhaps still useful to call out contemporary iterations of eugenic common sense for their face value incoherence. Still legitimate to sort of point out the hypocrisy that even as urban working class and black motherhood continue to come under attack, the barriers to black and working class women's access to contraception and abortion grow steadily more formidable. Obstetric care in India remains to this day among the most scant in the whole world, even though India exports and offers obstetric medical care to customers around the world. Such contradictions, we know, are part and parcel of capitalist geopolitical economy, which needs populations to extinguish in the process of making others thrive. Sharmila Rudrappa has an amazing book that shows that many of the populations in India who were sterilized are the same ones that are now being enrolled to make babies in the global north. It's not just life that is a sexually transmitted disease, as the old joke has it. Birth justice campaigners know, as indeed AIDS activists knew in the 80s and 90s, that it is death that sex spreads as well in the context of for-profit healthcare. However, this depressing state of affairs hasn't ever been the whole story. From Soviet mass holiday camps for pregnant comrades to Germany's inventive, albeit doomed, twilight sleep methods designed to completely erase the memory of labour pain. Human history contains a plethora of ambitious ideologies and technological experiments for universally liberating and collectivizing childbirth. It's admittedly an ambivalent record. Irene Lushtik, director of a beautiful 2013 archival film on this subject, has understandably harsh words for the various early 20th century rest camps and schools of childbirth that she discusses. But she suggests you have to hand it to them, even the most wrong-headed of textbooks written a century ago at least stated the problem to be resolved in uncompromising terms. Quote, birth injuries are so common that nature must intend for women to be used up in the process of reproduction, just as a salmon dies after spawning. Well, if that's what nature intends, the early utopian midwives and medical reformers featured in that film, The Motherhood Archives, responded, then nature is an ass. The thrust of much feminist analysis has been to rescue pregnancy from the status of the natural. Why accept nature as natural? If this is what childbirth is naturally like, they reasoned, looking about them in the maternity wards of Europe and America, then it quite obviously needs to be denatured, remade. Easier said than done. Pioneering norms of fertility care based on something like cyborg self-determination has turned out to be a moving target. The exceptionality and the careworthiness of gestation remains something that had to be forcibly naturalized, spliced in against the grain of a nature whose fundamental indifference to death, injury, and suffering does not, paradoxically, come naturally to most of us. And it's a bit of jiu-jitsu for you. However, many of these efforts to emancipate humanity from gestational nature have claimed the name of nature for their cause as well. For instance, the turn to so-called natural childbirth, which earned such fiery contempt from Shulamith Firestone in 1970 for being bourgeois, more accurately stands for a regimen full of carefully stylized gestational labor hacks and artifices, a suite of mental and physical conditioning that can be billed as intuitive, but which nevertheless take time and skill to master. Natural childbirth has never gone entirely out of fashion and is still extremely popular among diverse social classes. And while particular sub-doctrines of natural childbirth continue to come under well-justified fire, wherever they stray into mystification, the broader free birthing movement's foundational critique of just-in-time capitalist obstetrics and its colonial patriarchal history, whereby midwives, witches, and their indigenous knowledges were expelled from the gestational workplace, is hard to fault. Few people consciously want babies to be commodities, yet baby commodities are a definite part of what gestational labour produces today. So here we are. Given the variety of organising principles that can apply to the baby assembly line, it is ahistorical at best to claim that what we produce when we're pregnant is simply life, new life, and love. The related, philosophically widespread claim that social bonds are grounded biologically in pregnancy what some people call the 9-month head start to a relationship, is ultimately incomplete. The better question is surely, head start to what? What type of social bonds are grounded by which approach to pregnancy? The fabric of the social is something we ultimately weave by taking up where gestation left off, encountering one another as the strangers we always are, adopting one another skin to skin, forming loving and abusive attachments, and ideally striving at comradeship. To say otherwise is to naturalize and thus, ironically, to devalue that ideological shibboleth, the mother-fetus bond. What if we reimagined pregnancy and not just its prescribed aftermath as work under capitalism, that is, as something to be struggled in and against towards a utopian horizon free of work and free of value? Gestational commune. Full surrogacy now. Another surrogacy is possible. To the extent that these interchangeable sentiments imply a revolutionary program, as I would like them to, I'd propose it be animated by the following invitations. Let's bring about the conditions of possibility for open source, fully collaborative gestation. Let's prefigure a way of manufacturing one another non-competitively. Let's hold one another hospitably, explode notions of hereditary parentage, and multiply real loving solidarities and surrogacies. Let us build a care commune based on comradeship, a world sustained by kith and kind more than by kin. Where pregnancy is concerned, let every pregnancy be for everyone. Let us overthrow, in short, the family. It's admittedly quite hard to imagine the book by me that would do full justice to that remit. Happily, the ideas I've glossed here aren't new or original, and they will continue to be refined and concretized for years and years after this. And writing is, of course, the archetypal example of a distributed, omni-surrogated labor. While the name on the cover of this book is mine, the thoughts that gestated its unfinished contents, like the labors that gestated all the way into adulthood, the thinkers of these ongoing thoughts, are many. Authorship can only be co-authorship. Buy my book, though. Unabashedly interested in family abolition, I want us to look to wage to gestational assistance specifically, insofar as it illuminates the possibility of its imminent destruction by something completely different. In other words, I like to see a surrogacy worthy of the name, a real surrogacy solidarity. I'll wager there is no technological fix for the violent predicament that human gestators are in. Technologies for ex utero baby making might be a good idea, and the same goes for more ambitious research and development in the field of abortion and contraception. But fundamentally, the whole world deserves to reap the benefits of already available techniques currently monopolized by capitalism's elites. It's the political struggle for access and control, the commoning or communization of reprotech that matters most. It's certainly going to be up to us, since technocrats aren't going to do it for us, to orchestrate intensive scientific inquiry into ways to tweak bodily biology, to better privilege, protect, support, and empower those with uteruses who find themselves put to work by a placenta. Far from a cop-out, saying there is no miracle fix for gestation, except seizing the means of reproduction, should light a fire under our desires to abolish the obstetric present state of things. Beyond the centuries-long circular debate about whether our pregnancies are natural or pathological, there is, I know, a gestational commune, and I want to live in it.